6:01 it is. Let's do this. All right, good evening. This is the City Council work session for November 1st, 2021. This meeting is now called to order. There is an agenda in Spanish on the website. And now a roll call, please, Sue.
Councillor McBride.
Here.
Councillor Cofield.
What up here?
Councillor Yarnall Holloman.
Here.
Councillor Martinez Plancarte.
Here.
Mayor Rogers.
Here.
Councillor Bacon.
Here.
Councillor Findlay.
Here.
Mr. Mayor, all present.
All righty, thank you very much. All right, council agenda and meeting. Any items for this evening, folks? Suggested changes or anything? Seeing none, let's move on to item 4, council business. Go ahead, Mike.
So I just I'd like to get an update. Where are we at with Leonard Johnson's request to want to rebuild that old fallen down shed behind his furniture store? I mean, he talked to us about that way back in May. So I just wanted to know, where are we at with that? I mean, seems like it's taken a long time, or is it done?
Let's go ahead and we'll add that to the agenda for later this evening then during the business session. All right, an update on that. We'll see what we can get. All right, anything else, folks? All right, what about any council business items? All right, again, seeing none, let's move on to presentations. This is the NERPS Economic and Market Review. Will you introduce our speaker? I know Katie's involved with this as well.
Well, actually, for this particular one, it's going to be Katie that will introduce the speaker, and I will get the one in the next session.
Gotcha. All right. Good evening, Katie.
Good evening. So we have, I believe, 3 presenters on the line right now. We have Tanya, Mary, and Ben. They're all from Principal, and they're here to present a market analysis on our city-run pension plan NERPS.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Mary Caballero. I'm with One Digital Investment Advisors. We were formerly Impact Benefits and Retirement, and we merged with One Digital this year. So that's why you see the name change if you're familiar with our firm. We're a local pension and defined contribution consultant in Portland, Oregon. And then Tanya and Ben are here, and they'll be presenting momentarily. They are with Principal Financial Group, which is where your pension assets are held and invested, and also where your actuarial firm is, and all the benefit payments and that kind of thing come out of Principal. So let me see if I can share my screen. By 6 o'clock, I have 5,000 windows open, so bear with me. There we go. All right. Oh, these are all your reports, Ben. So Ben, actually, I'm gonna do my part first. I was gonna have you go first, but I think I will. There we go. Try that again. All right, can you guys see the City of Newburgh plan provisions? All right, great. So what I wanted to do today, because I know there may be some new to the pension plan and doing this review, we do a review twice a year. So I just wanted to go over the plan so you guys have a high level overview before Ben jumps into the economic review. So plan provisions, we actually just had an employee meeting about a week ago, and we have one-on-one meetings with employees. We have quite a few signed up for those, but we went over the plan provisions with everybody that attended that webinar, and that's what we're going to do today. Like I said, high level. So the plan is a defined benefit plan that provides retirement benefits to general employees. police, firefighters, and city attorneys. However, there are no longer everyone in the plan. That was historically what the plan was, but now everyone that's in it are general employees. Effective August 1st, 2016, the plan was what we call frozen. So participation is closed, and therefore no new hires on or after August 2016 participate in the plan. They go to PERS. However, current employees that were hired before that are still active in the plan. So the actuarial report for 7/1/2021 is not out yet. So we're looking at 7/1/2020. You guys have a 7/1 to 7/1 plan year. So there were 49 active participants, 36 terminated, and 70 retirees that are participating in the plan. Contributions, so employees participating in the plan contribute 6% of their annual compensation. Effective 1/1/95, the city pays the 6% employee contributions for certain employees. Employer contributions are determined on annual actuarial evaluations, which we're going to look at, and that determines the actuarial determined contribution that the city puts in each year. So the general benefits for employees or for general employees is 1.67% of average compensation times years of service. So that's what we went over in employee meetings as well. Normal retirement age is 60 for general employees. Early retirement is 55 for general employees. And unreduced benefits are available at normal retirement age upon completion of 30 years of service. Otherwise, the benefit is reduced for early commencement. So if you are 55 and you've had 30 years of service, you can retire with your full benefit, or you can retire at 55 and take an early reduced benefit, but normal retirement is age 60. There are other benefits available, including termination benefits, disability benefits, and pre-retirement death benefits, and there is COLA adjustments provided to retirees and beneficiaries. So for the actuarial evaluation, I am not an actuary, so I am speaking on behalf of the actuary tonight. He will be at the next meeting. So funded status as of July 1st, 2020, the market value of assets was 22 million at that time, and Ben will give us an update on where it's at now. We've had quite a year till recently. Actuarial accrued liability is 35 million. So you had 22 million in the plan, but your liability when they calculate that actuarially is 35 million, which gives you what we call an unfunded actuarial accrued liability, or UAAL for short, of 13.4 million, which gives you a funded status of 62% of your plan. And then from there, they determine your employer contribution for each year. Your normal cost, which is the cost of just accrued benefits in that year, was 0.24 million. But the amortization of that UAAL, that 13 million that the plan is underfunded, required a $1.34 million contribution. So you add those two up, and the required contribution for this last year was 1.58 million. And lastly, the funding liability breakdown. So the vast majority of your liability, funded or unfunded, is in the participants in pay status. So those are retirees currently receiving their benefit. That's 20.6 million. Terminated vested, those are people who have a benefit, but it hasn't started paying yet, but they don't work at the city anymore. That one's 3.7 million. And then your active participants, people who are still working at the city and actively accruing benefits, is at 11.2 million. And then you have their average age here as well. I think one thing to know on the average age is this 20 million, and your average age is 74. So recently they came out with new mortality tables that are in our favor as human beings, but not in the favor of the plan because people are living longer. But you do have a pretty aged average age there. So as life has it, you will start to see that dropping off. And because there are no new participants coming in, you'll see that liability start to dwindle over time until you have a fully funded plan. So that was a lot of the reason the decision was made to freeze that to new entrants, is because at 62% funding, it was just a decision that the city made that was in the best interest of everybody. So that is kind of the overview of where you are. Can I just ask if you guys have any questions before I give it to Ben?
Questions, anyone? Go ahead and, I can't see you all, so speak up if you have any. Mary, while there, I did have one question. You mentioned that it was something on the order, I think on the prior slide, something like 62% funded. Right, 62.3. How does that stack up? I mean, is that a good number? Is that average, or what do you think on that?
We could definitely look for improvement there. I think that, anything under 75, some decisions should be made, and that's where freezing the plan was a big decision to really help get that up. And Ben will present on assets, but that's another way. And then of course, just contributions. So yeah, we would like to see that higher for sure, but it's definitely not in the terrible red zone. I would say it's, we would like to see that more around 70 or 75%, because you'll see a more consistent actuarial determined employer contribution, and it will also be less. So that just gives you guys more budget flexibility. So that's what we'd like to see it a little bit higher.
Great,
And
thank you.
hopefully that we'll see that when we look at the assets, and especially as of 6/30/2021, that was a very good marker point in the markets to look at assets, because when they're looking at this from the actuary standpoint, they don't care what happens all year long. They care what happens on 6/30. They take that number and then they calculate this all out. So you guys will have a much better asset level at that time.
Thank you.
And
Any
just
other
to put
questions?
that, oh yeah, sorry, I
Sorry,
just
go
wanted
ahead,
to
Dave.
comment, just to put that into perspective, PERS is funded at 79%. So it has a much higher funded status than our own pension plan does.
Thank you. Mike?
So why don't we just flip everybody over to PERS? Why do we keep going with this if we're not allowing anybody else to go into it?
Because PERS won't allow that, unfortunately. They aren't taking active participants. They stopped doing that a long time ago. So the only thing you can do is keep your liabilities that you have and send everybody new over to PERS.
Okay, can I have a follow-up on that, please?
Yeah.
So if they stopped, I mean, what do you do if PERS won't? What do we do with like any new employees? If they can't go into this one and they can't go into PERS, what do we do to have any type of a plan for them?
Yeah, your new, sorry if I wasn't clear. Any new employees after August 1st, 2016 are going into PERS. It's anyone that was hired before that PERS won't take.
All right, any other questions, folks? All right, I don't think I see any, so.
Okay, Ben, to you.
Yeah, do you want me to share my screen or do you want to keep driving, Mary?
If you'd like to drive, that would be great.
I can do that. All right, so hopefully you see a big page on here that says economic and market review. Good. So, hi, I know it's been a little while. My name is Ben Miller. So I am on the fiduciary investment team that manages your plan. So we are the asset allocators that move money around and control the asset allocation. We're acting as a fiduciary. So our interests are aligned with yours, trying to put you in the best position to make returns. I was going to kind of dovetail off of Mary's, that slide we had up, and I don't have it up here, but on the funded status percentages. Remember, it is a delay, and Mary mentioned we're probably in a better position. if I just took a look at our assets as of the end of your plan year, which was 630 of 26.5 million, that's quite a bit up from where we were a year ago, if you think about what happened with the equity markets. And so since we don't have the valuation done on the liability side, if I just hold that constant and just increase the assets, we're at 74.6% funded. So that's much more in line with what we would like to see. If I
Yeah,
brought that,
just
go ahead.
dovetailing on that, Bill, Ben, your accrued liability it's only going to accrue by the normal cost, which is about 250,000 because you're frozen. So I think that is an okay assumption to make, that for all intents and purposes, the liability isn't going to go up much.
Market was up 6.9% in October. So markets have been positive since the end of your plan year also. So if I jump ahead even more and I give you your total assets as of now, which is 20, I just pulled this as Mary was talking, your total plan assets are 27,100,000 as of today, according to my high-tech system that I can see your balances on a daily basis. So that brings you up to 76.3% funded. So we're moving in the right direction. And hopefully when we see those valuation results, that should back it up. So anyway, I'm happy to answer any questions you all have off the top. If you have any, I thought I would spend just a couple minutes running through the markets briefly, if that's of interest to you. If you want me to skip that, I can go straight to your plan. You can give me a little guidance there, but I'm happy to give you a really high level overview if you like.
I just had one question.
Sure.
We used to have real estate, or we had real estate. We added it in a while ago. Is it with like the closing of malls and all those things? Is that scarier now than it used to be?
You still have 10% exposure to real estate, and I would be happy to talk about that when we get to the plan. I'll definitely, I brought one of the attachments is specifically on real estate.
Thank you.
And folks, do you want to hear a market overview, or do you want to skip right to the plan? Anybody have a preference?
I'd like to hear the overview, being I've never
Okay.
heard it before.
Let's do it then. Sounds good.
You do that. I'll definitely talk about the plan though, and just asset allocation and returns. And that's kind of my agenda. I don't have any big decisions that we need to make today. So it's more of just an update, and I think some positive news with how far the markets have come. But please interrupt me if you have any questions as I go. This economic report, it's pretty fresh, just as at the end of the quarter. I'm just going to hit some of the more key slides out of it, skip around here and there. The few things that we're watching that are driving the markets. I mean, number one is obviously just COVID and state of reopening and vaccinations, anything to do with it. And it seems like we're making positive progress globally towards being more of an open and things moving around and getting back to normal. So if we have another variant though, I mean, this is going to be in our lives for a while. So we are monitoring COVID and vaccinations. I think more right now, we're watching vaccination rates in some of those third world countries that have a lot of production and manufacturing to see how things are going to progress and how the supply chain might improve. Some of you probably noticed how long it takes to get anything right now if you're ordering any kinds of goods that are more durable. And so we need some of those more developing countries to really have their vaccination rates jump up to get back to a normal supply chain. So that's number one. Number two, I'd say, is inflation. Inflation has been in the news quite a bit and will continue to be in the news. I've got another slide on inflation, but the most pertinent inflation that we are seeing, and I'm guessing you're probably seeing this locally as well, is just wage inflation. There's been no federally mandated wage increase, but it sure feels like it. People are having to pay an arm and a leg to get anybody to work right now. And some of that was caused by the very robust unemployment benefits that happened last year and lingered for quite a while. But it just seems hard. I don't remember a time it was ever this hard to get anybody to work, right? And it doesn't matter what line of business it is. It seems like everybody's crunched and it's brought wages up everywhere. And so the concern that we have is something called stagflation. If inflation and wages specifically continue to go up, is that going to eventually cause prices to go up to the point that people can't afford to buy as much as they used to and that it reduces economic growth as a result. So we have our eye on inflation. Some things have come down, especially from your neck of the woods. Wood prices, lumber prices have really cooled off from where they were. Other commodity prices have come down, but housing prices remain high. Oil prices are very high compared to where they used to be. So there, some of the things that we watch for inflation are definitely persistent, whereas some others have, but that's going to continue to be in the news is inflation. And then the last thing is interest rates. It's probably read about the Fed, what they're doing with monetary policy and interest rates. Overall, interest rates are going up. They've been drifting up all year. They took a little bit of a backwards trend there in August, but for the most part, they're going up. And so the last time we had interest rates that really rose for an extended period of time was 07 and 08. You all remember what happened after interest rates rose that time around. So we need interest rates probably are warranted with the inflation that we have to protect purchasing power. It's definitely warranted for interest rates to go up. We just don't want it to be too fast that it really spooks the equity markets. So those three things, if I were to summarize this whole presentation, is what we think are going to drive the market the rest of the year and into next year. We'll talk about returns a little bit for your plan. The third quarter, which is this 3 month, was a wash. It was slightly up at time. It was pretty up through August, and then September was a pretty rough month for the market. But then we jumped right back in October. October was the most positive month we've had since November of last year. And seasonally, that's strange because October is not usually a great month for the equity markets. But 1 year numbers are still very, very high as we were coming off of those COVID bottoms a year ago. The other thing I'd point out here is just that US stocks have done much better than international stocks. And that really gets accentuated longer term when you look towards the 10-year numbers. So US stocks, which your portfolio is about 65 of our equity percent of about 65% US, 35% international, which is pretty on par with a global benchmark. And so I think it's benefited your plan to have that extra US stock exposure. The last big asset class here would be bonds. You'll see year over year, the Barclays Aggregate Bond Index is what most of your plan bonds are invested in, the benchmark for them, about flat. So what I'm trying to remind folks of is if interest rates are trickling up, remember there's an inverse relationship. So if rates go up, bond prices go down. It's going to really curtail what investment returns you can get in the future if 40% of our portfolio that's invested in bonds is returning zero. Equities have to go up 20 to 30% to get a 10% type return. And we just don't see that that's going to happen year over year. We've had a heck of a run the last 2 years, coming off of a pandemic, but we're not calling for 20% equity returns next year. We're probably going to normalize back into if we could hit 10%, we'd call it a great year next year. So if we have 10% stock returns and potentially 0% bond returns, you can do the math there on what an actuarial expected return might look like next year. And it's probably mid-single digits. So things are good, but we probably need to be mindful going forward that it's not going to stay returns like this year over year over year. I talked about interest rates. In interest of time, I'll just skip ahead. I mentioned stagflation earlier. If you haven't heard that term before, it's just that prices go up and it stalls out economic growth. And so it's inflationary pressures that make economic growth go to nothing. That is something that we are concerned with and we're continuing to monitor. You may have seen in the news transitory versus non-transitory inflation. Transitory just means it's year over year comps that are strange, and then the commodity might go right back down and it normalizes. But overall, there are inflation undertones that are persistent. We're just not used to it. We haven't seen inflation really for a long time, but we definitely are right now. Let's see the dot plot and the Fed. I was going to talk about interest rates, which is on 21. I think most folks that I talk to, we're all pretty familiar with the equity markets, not so much with the credit markets. The fixed income markets are very relevant for your pension plan because we have 40% exposure to bonds. 2 two things that are going on. So that you may have seen the Fed has announced that they are going to reduce their bond purchase program. That's the program they put into place last March, where they are buying 120 billion with a B, $120 billion worth of bonds every month in order to create liquidity and keep interest rates low. I can make a pretty good argument they haven't needed to do that for the last 3 quarters, but they've continued to do that as economic growth has been bouncing back from the COVID bottom. But now they've announced they're going to start unwinding that program and eventually start selling the bonds that they have on their balance sheet. So this top chart that you see on page 21 is the Fed balance sheet. You can see just how egregious it's grown over the last year and a half. At some point, you would think this is going to flatten out because they've announced it's going to. But when they start selling bonds or they start not purchasing as much, it's going to cause upward interest rate pressure. You know, there's going to be more supply out there of bonds, which is going to cause interest rates to go up. So that's the first part, is we need to navigate that next year, and it could cause some equity volatility. Second part of it is just the Fed funds rate. So that's the overnight bank rate. That's what a lot of banking deposits rates are based off of. They've announced that they're probably going to start to increase that in mid-2022. So it's something called the dot plots, if you follow that at all, would be their projections for interest rates going up. So we've got long-term rates probably going up, and then short-term rates are probably going to go up. So the whole yield curve is going to be working upward, which, if you do the math historically, does not usually trend well for economic growth and for equity performance. So that's something very important that we're going to monitor the rest of the year. But I might just, in the interest of time, just end this part of the conversation here. I would say that we're still positive and constructive on the markets, but we need to be realistic about what returns we probably are going to get over the next year. We don't think that the current trends are going to persist, but we do think that we're set up well. If you watch corporate earnings the last couple of weeks, companies are making gobs of money. It's just how high can prices go before that starts to curtail. So I hope that was interesting. I didn't bore you. Is that any questions before I transition specifically to your plan? Any comments, other things you've seen out there that you wanted to ask about?
Shout it out if you have any questions, folks. All right, not seeing any, Ben.
Okay. So this is another attachment that I think was provided. This is your investment advisory report. And we ran this as up to date as I could through the end of the quarter at the time. We started the report as of the beginning of this current plan year, so 7/1, just a few months ago. I've also got our report from the end of the year, last year, last plan year, if you'd like to look at it at all to see how your investment returns came out. I think I sent that out and distributed that at the time. Just as a reminder, we're using a broad asset allocation. So my team, we don't manage, we don't buy and sell stocks. We hire the investment managers to do that for us. We're really acting as the asset allocator. So there's a variety of different investment managers that manage the money for your portfolio. And we hold them all to standards, we benchmark all of them, and we hire and fire managers as necessary. So asset allocation wise, there were 2 things I was going to point out, changes that we've made over the last 10 months, first 10 months of this calendar year. And they're very small things, and they're international equity. So we actually reduced the exposure that we had in this international small cap separate account. It was already pretty low. I think we cut it from 3.2 to 1.6%. So in this report, it shows like it's equal, but that's because we did it in June prior to the beginning of this report. But we reduced the weight of that portfolio. So this is a little bit more of the volatile, risky area of the international equity area. And our systems just didn't like the volatility that we were picking up. So we reduced that a little bit in favor of some of the safer international equities. In October, which is more recent than this report, we shifted a little bit of our portfolio from the overseas account, that's about 5% of your plan, into the diversified international account. This is kind of splitting hairs here, but it's foreign large value versus foreign large blend/growth. So all I'm telling you is our models are starting to prefer more of the growth areas of the international equity area versus value. So I'm not imagining that any of you are going to lose sleep over it, any of these small changes that we're doing, but I did want to just bring them up to show you what we're doing behind the scenes and managing your plan. We're always looking at these and adjusting these on an ongoing basis. So those are the two tweaks that we made so far on a calendar year to date. Otherwise, this is pretty consistent. So for those of you who remember this report in the past, this is pretty consistent with what we've seen in the past. We have 40% of the investment allocation invested in bonds, 10% invested in that real estate account that I'll talk about, and the remainder in those equity accounts at about a 65-35 split. All the target weights are there, but I'll just flip to the money page. This is the one that everybody likes, that really matters, is how is the plan doing? What have our returns been? So the returns you see here on page 11, these are the net of fees, net of expenses returns for every investment option, every part of the portfolio. And then in total, at the top there, the total portfolio. So year to date, that's performance for your plan. Or no, excuse me, the year to date on this page is the calendar year to date. The quarter is essentially your plan year to date, if that makes sense. So your portfolio plan started on 7/1, so quarter is really your plan as it started out. This is calendar year 6.61%. 12-month performance as of 9/30. I could put a big bow on this and say it's probably the biggest outperformance that we've had in a 12-month period in a long time. And it's probably one of the higher periods of performance that we've had in a long time. So 15.7% returns is a lot more than we thought we would get over the last 12 months. And we are extremely happy, I'm looking at the top chart here, extremely happy with our performance of the portfolio outperforming the benchmark that we judge ourselves against. So the performance of the benchmark was up 14.2%. We were up 15.7. So we were up about 1.5% versus that index, what we would call alpha, above benchmark performance. The 3-year we're actually on top of to 100th, but then longer term, it's been pretty positive as well. So we would look at that as if we were just indexing everything, that's the performance we would expect is what that index is. But in managing your portfolio and rebalancing and reallocating, we've been able to show some value. I hope you would agree with that over time in producing these returns. We're also happy over the last 12 months that in every category, so we look at US equity, international equity, real asset, and fixed income, each category we were above the index performance. So it wasn't all coming from one little spot in the portfolio. We had pretty broad performance across the different areas that we judge ourselves against. Just so you can see for comparison at the end of your plan year on 6/30. So these are the numbers that are going to be reflected in that actuarial valuation that Stuart's still working on. But your 12-month returns were 21.66% as of the end of June. So all it took was the global pandemic for the portfolio to go up 21.66%.
Katie, did you have a comment?
I do. I just have a quick question since we're talking about market returns. I know that the actuarial valuation is not complete yet, but because we've had such really great returns this past year, are we looking to think that the assumed rate of return is going to still stay the same? Or, I mean, just kind of looking at the city's like rates that we pay for payroll and stuff for the pension plan, just wondering if that's going to potentially stay the same because the market has been so good. Or, I mean, I know PERS recently decrease their assumed rate of return because they're anticipating a market crash coming. So I don't know what you guys were thinking on that.
I can give you some high level, and if Mary wants to jump in with anything, feel free. But high level, what we're seeing is reductions in assumed rates of return, like what you saw with the state. So because of the fixed income asset class, and that's dragging everything. And so your assumed rate of return is forward looking. It has nothing to do with what's happened in the back. Now you're going to have a positive actuarial adjustment because of these returns being much higher than what were expected. So that'll be a positive adjustment, but it doesn't necessarily play into what's assumed for the future.
Okay. Thank you.
Mary, do you have anything to add to that?
No, agreed. That's what we're seeing across the board as well. Is that fixed income pieces. And because markets are at a all-time high, we're seeing performance expectations go down as well.
So more to come, but there will be some positive adjustment to your funding levels because of these returns being so much higher than what we expected. So I'm happy to answer any other questions. The rest of this report was just to the individual portfolios. I don't know that we need to get into the minutia of that today. We look at all of these portfolios on a quarterly basis and we score each of them. We keep track of due diligence files. We do have one investment that's on our watch list right now. That's that same international small cap portfolio that we reduced in June. It had a little bit of a rough year versus its benchmark, so it underperformed its benchmark. It got whipped around with some of the momentum last year and underperformed on a peer group base. So it's on our watch list. We're reviewing it. We might make a change. We're still figuring that out. We're going through the process, but it's a really small percent of your plan. And overall, I'd rather have something on our watch list while it still was up 23 or 24% over the last 12 months than something that was very negative. So it still helped the portfolio overall. We're just monitoring it against this benchmark and peer group. Any questions before I spend just a minute on real estate, and that'll wrap my section.
Looks like Mike has a question.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, if the interest rates start going up, how fast do you reach out to us? Because we would need to adjust it, because if the interest rates go up, then the bonds that we have a lot of stock in go down. Did I hear you, understand you right? And so I guess I'm wondering is, how fast would you guys get a hold of us? Do we just have a touch base on a quarterly basis? How does this work?
Get a hold of you to do what, I guess?
Well, I guess in order to make some adjustments on where we have our money being invested.
Well, we can do that whenever you like, if you want to make big strategic changes to allocations. I mean, typically, these are pooled accounts of bonds, so we're not holding anything to maturity. If interest rates go up like they have the last quarter, and I'll just show you. So your portfolios are towards the bottom of this page, putting aside high yield because that's its own beast. But the bond index that we use was down 1% this past quarter. So durationally, your portfolios are about 6.5 years, 7 years duration. So even if interest rates went up a whole 1%, you'd only expect these portfolios to go down 6 or 7%. So that's not going to clobber the whole portfolio right away. And I'd argue that 1% is a huge move and it's not going to happen all at once. You're also going to be picking up coupon payments off of the bonds. So that'll eat into any negative return. And right now that's 2.5% or so on yields. So you can afford to have interest rates go up and still collect the coupons and you'd be breaking even. You just can't have it happen too fast. But we will hold this strategically long term just because of the correlation and hedge benefits of bonds with stocks, unless you were to tell us you want to change the risk level of the plan. So even if they start to lose money, we don't think that's going to go on forever. We're going to keep invested in those portfolios strategically longer term. So even if interest rates started going up, I wouldn't anticipate a scenario where we need to reach out to do anything or react to it unless you wanted to strategically reduce your bond allocation, which we're caught in a rock and a hard place, right? We could reduce our bond exposure because we think interest rates are going to go up. So then we put it in the equity markets at all-time highs, right? So that's where we're trying to find the best balance there. And that's what's making it tough right now is you have to put the capital somewhere.
All right, other questions, folks? Not seeing any.
Okay, so I'll just wrap with the real estate back to our original question. Real estate portfolio has done very well. And this is the third quarter summary that they do. They do a really good job. This is the one we use for your portfolio, about 10% exposure. You've maintained a pretty good portfolio, and this was at Mary and her firm's request years ago when they analyzed the investment allocation. You have a little bit more exposure than some of our other plans, and it's benefited the heck out of the plan. Real estate has done very, very well, minus that few month window last year when nobody knew what was going on with real estate. So the portfolio that you own actually has ownership in properties. It's not a REIT, doesn't invest in securities. It actually buys and sells the properties. Over the last 12 months, you can see down here, it's up 13.4% on a net of fees basis. Appreciation, they divided up equally between the rental incomes off of those properties and the appreciation of the properties. I did think, so to your question, Denise, it's interesting when you look at it sector by sector. The portfolio is 32% office, 25% industrial, 29% multifamily. That's the core of the holdings. And if you look at the second bullet up here, this talks about the quarter performance. Industrial sector was up 7.7%, multifamily was up 7%, while office was only up 1%, and retail was up 1.7%. So there is definitely some differences in different types of real estate that you're seeing. Industrial has been hot as can be. And that's because, you know, we're buying everything, right? Everybody needs space to make things, and there's not enough space. Office space has the biggest question marks as to who's going to be in an office. Are they going to keep paying their bills? For the most part, we've seen employers continue to have lease payments, but there's a heck of a lot of questions as to whether they're going to renew when they come up next year, or whether they're going to reduce their square footage, or what's going to happen and who's going to pick up that real estate. So the occupancies for this portfolio have remained pretty strong. Total portfolio occupancy was at 91.3%. They just built some new properties that they need to fill, which is relatively high, but it really does matter on a sector by sector basis. So we like it overall. We think it's still positioned well, and some of those other areas are going to continue to be hot. You can't find open industrial space just about anywhere.
On
Questions?
that,
What's that?
oh, Ben, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, on that note, there will soon be open industrial land in Newburgh. So if any of your clients are looking for places to invest, Newburgh would happily accept that, as long as they provide family wage jobs. So there you
Noted.
go. All right.
I would add to this, Ben, just for the committee's knowledge on this fund. So one of the risks of this fund, besides the regular real estate risk, is that they can put a restriction on liquidity. And they did put that restriction on last year and kept it on for quite some time. So if that happens, you aren't able to move the allocation out of this fund. But the reason that they do that is to protect all the investors in the fund, so that they're not having to fire sell properties to come up with liquidity. And they have removed that restriction now. So the fund is fully liquid again. So I just want to make sure you guys are aware of that too. And while it sounds like a risk, because it is, it also is a huge protection against all the investors to have that as part of the fund.
And this last arrow speaks a little bit to that liquidity management. So they actually are still restricting new money coming in because they want to be prudent with where they're putting it to use to protect, you know, folks like yourselves with their current investments. But they're allowing distributions to go freely, as Mary said now. So we rode that out through most of last year. Makes sense though. I mean, you wouldn't want to have to sell a property last year in the middle of everything. So, and it's come back around. So I think it makes sense. But I like to spend a minute, Denise, I don't know if I answered your questions, but I'd like to spend a minute on there.
It did, thank you.
Okay, just because it's a larger part of your portfolio and it's kind of unique. Personally, I think it's interesting to see what kind of properties are doing well where, and they are very much invested on the coast, specifically out where you guys are, and not so much in the Midwest, as you might imagine. So that's it. That's all. I ran through my page. So any other questions or things that hopefully this, you know, no decisions tonight, but just hopefully with some positivity on where we've come the last 12 months on the plan. Hopefully you feel pretty good about returns, but I'm happy to answer any questions or address anything you might like.
All right, any other questions, folks? All right, nope. All right, again, I'm not seeing any. So
Okay.
I think we're all set.
Thank you all for having us. We'll talk to you in April.
All
Take
righty,
care.
well, thank you. Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much. And hopefully things continue on the upward swing, right? So let's
Yeah,
keep that
please.
inflation down. If y'all have any influence on it, keep it down, will you? All right, thank you. Thanks so
All right.
much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
See
you.
in the spring.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, looks like we got a couple ticks left here, folks. I guess we can do one of two things. Will, would you like to give your first city manager's report?
Certainly, or as I would like to call it, my first interim city manager's report. So first of all, I'd just like to say, of course, to anybody who's listening and to you guys, I do have a Scottish accent, and I'm sorry, it's the only one I've got. So we'll have to make do with that. I was honoured when the council asked me to serve for a short time in this interim role, and this is the most important thing that I've ever been asked to do in my working career. Fortunately, last night I did have one night's sleep compared to the previous 6 nights, so we're getting somewhere. I'd like to ask the council and the community, however, to stop for a moment and try and take a deep breath. And instead of dwelling on our troubles, let's reflect for a little moment about what makes Newburgh special. And if the graphics listening to this portion, please print this verbatim. This is the city that was central to Oregon's existing in the first place because of the estate of Ewan Young. And thanks to the courage of our police officers, this is the safest city in Oregon. That's official, as we all know, and you can look it up. Somewhere today, a member of my staff jumped in a cold and muddy hole to keep the water clean and pure, and it happens every day. Last week, we won the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting from the Government Finance Officers Association. And that's a woot moment. While I'm gone from the library, it's being run by the recipient of the highest honour that an Oregon librarian can win, the Lampman Award. So I'd like to thank you very much, Corey, for doing that for me. This is my home, and that's why I agreed to take on this role. During my tenure, I'm going to be focusing on back to basics for our local government, and I'll be providing council with more statistical data from department heads to help you guys inform your decisions and highlight the work that we do every day. You can expect hard data from future CM reports starting from next month. I'll also be paying attention to the bottom line and will be seeking to keep the budget balanced so as to give my successor a solid start. In addition, I'll be working in a supporting role to help shape our ARPA thinking and our strategic planning, which are both already underway. Operationally, I'll be helping HR reorganize our personnel records to be ready for a future compensation analysis. And I'll be creating a formal hiring procedure and launching a Strive staff committee to take our internal culture up to the next level. I have set myself the objective of completing these operational enhancements before the turn of the new year. And draft documents have already been created for 2 out of the 3 objectives that I just mentioned. In general, I try to be a man of few words, unless of course I'm running a children's storytime event. So I think that's probably enough from this report, but I would be delighted to take any questions that you may have about these initiatives. Thank you.
All right, there's your chance to ask questions.
Can I just say thank you to Will? Thank you, Will, for doing this. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Denise.
Mike.
Yeah, I just, it was good to talk with you last night, Will. Haven't really had that chance too much, but I want to just publicly say I appreciate the thoughtfulness of taking on this role and the objectives that you laid out. And I'm very appreciative of that, and I'm looking forward to seeing you know, what we can do to go in a better direction.
I'll give it my very best, Mike. I can't promise I'll succeed in all regards, but these operational changes that I've described, those are going to happen.
Right, other comments, folks? All right, you know, just, Will, it's a small thing, and Mike referenced it as well from, you know, but this is, first off, I echo completely what Denise is saying, and I think it shouldn't be just the council that should thank you. I think the entire community should thank you. I think all the staff at the city should thank you as well for doing this. But a very, you know, small but a very telling thing to me was that you took your time on Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock to stand there and hand out candy for hours in front of City Hall. Now, again, it was a small thing, but yet it means a whole lot. And it's important, and it's mostly important to those little kids who you made so happy. And the Scottish accent got some comment too. So, you know, there you go. There it is. So thank you, Will. All right, folks, I got about 10 minutes or 8 minutes to 7. So why don't we come back, and why don't we make it 7:05? We'll be back here. Give yourselves a chance to get some water or something. And 7:05, we'll be back. Thank you. All right, folks, looks like I've got 7:05, and this is the City Council business session for November 1st, 2021. This meeting is now called to order. There is an agenda in Spanish on the website. A roll call, please, Sue.
Sorry, I was ready for Pledge of Allegiance. Never mind. Okay, it's been a day. Councillor McBride,
Here.
Councillor Cofield,
Here.
Councillor Yarnell Holleben. Here. Councillor Martinez Plancarte,
Here.
Mayor Rogers,
Here.
Councillor Bacon,
Here.
Councillor Finley.
Here.
Mr. Mayor, all present.
Okay, thank you. Now, the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you all very much. All right, for those who were not listening to the work session, we did hear from our interim city manager, Will Worthy, during the work session earlier this evening. So now let's move on to, if I could, item 5 on our agenda, public comments. First, I'll start with a written comment received from a resident by the name of Carrie Flo. Council, you should have seen it in your packet, but the public may not have. So here is Carrie Flo's comment. I'm opposed to the changes in neighborhood housing by the City Council. Our roads and streets are overcrowded and in need of repair. Putting high-density housing in while eliminating single family will make neighborhoods suffer. Children in particular need space outdoors in which to play. Cramming more people into smaller units is not good for anyone except the developers and those who want to further destroy the nuclear family. All right, so that's general public comment. And I believe we also have 2 other people signed up. And if we can promote Jesse Cad, Sue, that would be great.
Okay, hang on just a sec.
Thank you.
The second person, I'm not seeing their phone number on the screen, but I have promoted Mr. Cad, and I will get timer tools going here.
All right, good evening, Mr. Cad. Once we have a timer up, you are ready, and we are waiting to hear your comments. All right, we are ready when you are. Oh, there, it looks like, there we go. There we are.
As usual, always the unmute button. Ready to go. I'm ready to start. Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Rogers, and good evening, councilors. I have a few comments I'd like to make. First, regarding the urban renewal plan, I'm glad to see that progress is being made in moving forward with it. Again, I personally support that plan and would like to see the riverfront and mill areas redeveloped in such a way that attracts more businesses and makes Newburgh an even better place to live than it already is. However, I am concerned to stress that at some point, this plan should be put to the Newburgh voters to confirm the general agreement of the people. I understand that there is a provision for public referendum within the plan, and I want to ensure the council hears loud and clear that the people of Newburgh deserve the final word on whether to proceed with the financial risk implicit in borrowing against the potential future increase in property value and therefore taxes. Second, regarding the upcoming decisions on how to spend COVID-19 federal aid money, I would like to strongly suggest that the council considers doing something that will benefit the most number of people in this town. Pay down the debt owed for the water processing plant and consequently reduce the cost of water in this town. Newburgh has some of the highest water costs in the area, and all due to previous poor decisions in management, the cost of which is being passed on to residents. Paying down this debt will significantly help low-income families by reducing the percentage of their budget allocated toward utilities. Please consider this option before special interests get their fingers into the pie. Lastly, I want to point out a couple of recent articles by Carrie Martell, who grew up in Newburgh and recently became angered by the news of how our town is being taken over by those who promote ideologies based on critical theory, such as anti-racism and diversity, equity, and inclusion. He exposed the Facebook groups used by the people who coordinated this takeover: Newburgh Equity in Education, also known as NEED, and Progressive Yamhill, showing in detail how some members of this council have worked together behind the scenes with this group to appoint leaders friendly to their causes, disclose information to their group members, and coordinate boycotts and attacks on their opponents. In a post defining the NEED group's purpose, admin Beth Woolsey explicitly states that one of their goals is, quote, advocating for the Newburgh Public School Board to adopt critical race theory, end quote. So hopefully that puts to rest any suggestion that this is just an academic theory not present in our school system or city for that matter. The entire ideology of this group is founded on CRT, and it informs their program of revolution. It teaches that individualism, rationality, and hard work are racist, which is an insult to hardworking families of all racial backgrounds in this town. It seeks to foment race-based consciousness where none exists in an effort to transform generalized guilt into political power. It seeks to divide our town into oppressor and oppressed based on skin color. It says the solution to past discrimination is present discrimination. I and all people of common sense reject this. Racism is always wrong, but the solution is not more discrimination, it is less. The members of the council who have participated in this group know who they are, and anyone can read the articles to see in detail how they have been colluding. I call on them to resign because the majority of people in this town are opposed to their woke racist agenda. We need to restore common sense, reject CRT ideology, roll back the diversity, equity, and inclusion Trojan horse policies in our city, schools, and institutions, and get back to focusing on doing actual city business, not self-flagellating after every trumped up story of racism is immediately blasted to a news media eager to assist in spreading the false narrative that this is a racist town. Systemic racism is a false construct used to accrue power to those who want to use it, and we will not be fooled anymore. I have submitted the articles in question to the City Council for the record. I urge you all to review them, though they are long. Thank you for your time.
All right, Mr. Cad, thank you very much. Have a nice evening. Sue, do we have Pat Haight on the line?
No, I'm not
No,
seeing her.
Pat.
She was gonna call in. She said
No.
if she could figure it out, but
Okay.
I already emailed you her question.
Right, and okay, and I will get back just for whoever might be interested. Pat Haight is interested in the efforts the city is making in order to bring jobs to our community. We will get back to her. I spoke to her some today, but we'll get back to her with additional details on what's going on in community, in business development in that area. All right. So that looks like the end of general public comments this evening. So I will close that section of the agenda. And we're now on to a public hearing. This is an administrative public hearing, resolution 2021-3770, waste management requests a rate increase. So this public hearing is now called to order. And the testimony procedure, we have a couple of comments regarding this item. But first, let's start with declarations of conflict of interest or abstentions. Anyone? Okay. Hearing none, let's move on and move directly to the staff report on this. I'm not sure, Will, are you going to do the introduction? Okay, thank you.
Yes,
so much.
I'll do the introduction. So the item that we're going to be discussing is recommended by staff that we adopt resolution number 2021 TAC 3770, approving adjustments to the garbage and recycling service rates from our provider Waste Management effective January 1, 2022. In essence, the city has an exclusive franchise with Waste Management for the hauling of garbage and collection of recycled materials for the city. The agreement would give the city the right to regulate these rates, and they do occasionally need to be reviewed, obviously, as things change. I'd like to introduce the people who are going to be giving this information to us. I do know there are a couple of specific comments which would like to weigh in on this matter as well. But tonight we're going to have Mike Jeffries, Director of Pricing, Dave Huber, Senior District Manager, who we all know, we've all been down there and visited with him from time to time. Thanks for the 20-yard dumpster the other year, mate. Appreciate it. And also Gary Nelson, Operations Manager for Newburgh District. And with that, I think we should move over to public comments that are specific to this matter.
So James, we have an administrative public hearing tonight because it does involve a rate increase. Do you want the mayor to open the hearing first before Waste Management gives a staff report?
That'd be great. Yes, we could do that.
All right, yes, and the public hearing is now open. We've received a bit of written public testimony, but let's hear first the staff report or the report of, if anyone would like to give us a summary of what we are looking at, and then we can go in and I'll enter the public comment into the record immediately after that.
So in essence, Waste Management is requesting that the city approve a 3.7% general rate increase effective January the 1st, 2022. The proposed garbage and recycling rates and other operational data from the council review and consideration is attached in Exhibit A. Per the franchise agreement, the council will consider all relevant factors, including current and projected revenue, the cost of acquiring and replacing equipment, net cost of reuse and recycling rates, as established in other jurisdictions for similar services. At City's request, Waste Management has also presented the rates for starting a food waste program. And of course, there are many things that we need to consider along those lines as well. That can be a complicated thing to launch. This program, if we did launch it, would allow residents to include food waste material in the yard debris. Due to the higher degree of processing and additional travel time for a new facility, this would add 85 cents per month to a residential customer's bill. And in the documents provided in the packet, you can see the fiscal impacts and also the strategic assessment. And I'm not quite sure, Mike, are you going to be leading off on explaining some of this to us?
Sure, I'd love to. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council. Again, my name is Mike Jeffries, Area Pricing Director. And, I've had the privilege of working in the city of Newburgh for the last 10 years or so. And I like to think I'm a resident since I do pay rent there for my son who goes to George Fox and is on the football team. And yes, it's been great to see the improvements in the cities over the years. And yes, tonight we're before you asking for a 3.7% increase. And this is the first increase we've asked for since 2016. And had we asked for a CPI adjustment over that same period of time, the rates would be about 5% higher than what we're requesting. So kudos to Dave Huber and his team, Gary Nelson. A few years back, they looked to do some automation of the systems there in the city of Newburgh. And as a result, increased our efficiencies that allowed us to keep the rates as low as they have been over the past few years. And so unfortunately, with replacing of capital, higher expenses, fuel costs, higher disposal costs, things of that nature, higher wages for our drivers, we're at before you asking for this increase of 3.7%. And I think over the last couple of city council meetings, Evan Burmester, who works for me, has presented you with a couple different PowerPoint presentations that kind of show where those expenses are coming from and our need at the present time. So with that, I'd open it up to any questions you may have, or maybe Dave, if you have any comments, but I feel like it should be pretty straightforward at this point, unless you guys have any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'll just add, if you don't mind, again, Dave Huber, District Manager for our Newburgh operations. Good evening, everybody. And so the resolution tonight in front of you is specifically, it's for just the rate request increase. We also have explored adding food waste to the yard debris, but you know, we want to kind of put that to the curb for now. We want to see if we can get some more community support, feedback as to whether, you know, everybody would like to add that to the service, which, you know, we initially did a survey about 1.5 years ago, and we were willing to do another one. And then that way, I think that's probably a good way to look at it too, because tonight it's just, you know, for this, we can come back in a few months with some more feedback from the community members to see if they want to do that, and then explore that at that time. So hopefully that kind of clarifies the two different you know, items this evening.
I think I would also like to add that given the difficulty in hiring truck drivers right now, some of those logistics parts, obviously the costs have increased somewhat, and that plays into why the staff are recommending this also.
Okay, any other questions or comments, folks? All right, let's now then, I'll open public testimony. We have 2 written comments. Do not have anyone, I do not believe, on the line or on here to address the item specifically. But particularly for the folks from waste management, first there's a, you know, Dave, you had mentioned the compost. There is some interest. We did receive a note from Sharice Bach that we will certainly, if you do not have a copy of it, we'll certainly make sure you have one. And that's, you know, encouraging us pushing forward with using the compost. That's that. And also a second public comment, again, this one from Robert Suppy, this time asking about the depot that once was at First and Everest location for recycling. So he is asking about sort of the status of that, and so those are the 2 public comments, not directly related to the rate that we're proposing this evening, but comments that you know, if you can get us answers, we'll happily get those to the folks that requested the information, or at least to Mr. Suppy.
You bet. Yeah. To answer that second question specifically. We did have a glass recycling depot there off of First and Everest for many years, and it was for just glass recycling, and it was an unmanned, you know, location, just carts right there, you know, just on the east side of the coffee barn. But once we initiated the subscription glass service in the city of Newburgh, we felt like that area it wasn't really being utilized as much, and then there was also contamination issues because it was just out in the open. So we made the decision to pull those carts, you know, so that convenience is not there anymore. However, you know, the transfer station recycling depot is open Monday through Saturday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. To drop off any glass if people don't have the subscription glass service at their house.
Sorry. I think in Mr. Suppy, and you'll get a copy of this the letter, but Mr. Suppy argues that that's a convenient location for people on the south side of town, particularly who may not, have means either to have the service at home or to drive to Winooski. So anyway, that's what his request is. So, all right. Okay. And then Sharice Bach, again, as you had mentioned, Dave, the thought of having another survey in order to determine whether or not people would like the service of kitchen composting in the landscape material. So that again is for information. Okay. Thank you. With that, I believe that's all the public testimony we received on this item. Right, Sue? No other public
Mr.
testimony?
Mayor, that is all we've received for resolution 2021-3700.
Thank you. With that, I will close public testimony and the recommendation from staff, please, Will.
I'll get better at this, don't worry.
Well, we're putting you right in the hot seat, so there you go.
Hang on a second.
And if not, I've got it right here, Will, if you like.
I was deep in the tables there, and hang on, here we go.
Okay.
Staff recommend that we adopt resolution number 2021 TAC 3770, approving adjusted garbage and recycling rate services for waste management effective January 1, 2022.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, folks. Let's see, any deliberation, folks, or any additional questions? Now is the time. All right, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment for those who might be listening. 5 years ago, the increase was 3.34%. So this is less, than what it was 5 years ago. So I just applaud Waste Management. I think that they're doing a good job in holding costs down. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't like rate increases, and who does, but I think this is reasonable. So I just wanted to congratulate them now.
All right, anyone else? Any other comments? Go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I concur with Mike. When we're looking at this, we see that there were rates increases pretty regularly for a number of years, and then we haven't had a rate increase since 2016. So I don't love rate increases either, because it does impact my family as well. But I also know that it's important that we stay on top of this so that we don't get further down the road and have even bigger rate increases all at one time. So while it doesn't feel great, we definitely need to work on making sure that we're getting the services paid for that we're utilizing.
Denise, did I see your hand as well? No?
No.
Anyone else? Any other comments? Okay, all right. Seeing none, can someone provide a motion, please?
Mayor, I move that we adopt resolution 2021-3770.
I would second that.
And Denise with a second. All right, any further discussion? All right, I guess we'll do it. So can we do a voice vote?
Yes. Councillor McBride,
Yes.
Councillor Cofield,
Yes.
Councillor Yarnell Holloman,
Yes.
Councillor Martinez Plancarte,
Yes.
Mayor Rogers,
Yes.
Councillor Bacon,
Yes.
Councillor Findlay.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, passes 7-0.
Thank you very much. All right, and to Mike and Dave and Gary, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the service you provide to the community. And Mike, please note, go Bruins, right? Tell your son. Go
Exactly.
Bruins. All right.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Have a good evening. All right, we are now on to new business. This is item 7A. Briefing middle housing, triplex, quadplex, cottage clusters, and townhouses. Community Development Director, Mr. Doug Rux.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilors, I would like to start this evening by introducing Mary Heberling Crichton. She is our housing planner. So most of you have not met her yet as we continue to work virtually. So been a welcome addition into the department. And so we're trying to keep her focused on all things housing. But she is helping me backfill on current planning things as time allows. So what I wanted to do this evening was kind of step back to where we were at in June of 2021. So we had a joint work session with the Planning Commission to talk about what I generically call the other middle housing. The reason we're doing this is you've got a legislative hearing coming up in December on this topic. So I wanted to refresh everybody so you didn't have a long hiatus, because it'll have been almost 6 months. So we got a PowerPoint and I will move through that. So just as a reminder is that we have some housing needs issues, of course, in Newburgh, and we've done a lot of work, and we'll get into that into another topic later in the agenda. We've already done the duplex work, and so council adopted that ordinance back in June, and we had drafted up the language for the triplexes, quadplexes, townhouses, and cottage clusters. Some of you may remember the housing needs analysis, and so we were toggling away from single family and going more towards other types of housing to try to fulfill that particular need that's there. And probably the critical part of this is the Oregon legislature passed House Bill 2001. And with that came along provisions and requirements. And so we had to do the duplex work first, but council had directed when we applied for a grant to DLCD, which we received, to also work on the other middle housing components. Next slide. All right, so we did a complete audit of our code. As I've mentioned a couple times, we already did the duplex stuff. Previously, I mentioned that we did the joint work session back in June. And we're on track still in the November, December timeframe to get in front of the Planning Commission and the City Council with the proposal. We did the public engagement back early in this process. So we did virtual open houses. We did a couple of community surveys and got feedback that fed into all of the middle housing work that our consultants and staff have put together. Next slide. So we're going to talk about a little bit about the basics. So tris, quads, townhouses, and cottage clusters. And so what we've got is some graphics that represent some of these different products that are out there. Your lower right is the cottage cluster concept. The top right would be a quadplex or a fourplex. The bottom left is something that's more in the range of a townhouse type of development. And then the top left is a triplex. And so it's architecture materials have come a long ways from what we kind of traditionally used to see in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and into the 80s, something that was more boxy style. Architects are doing a really good job of putting these particular products together from a design perspective. Next slide. So when we did the duplex work, we had to allow that on all lots where we allowed single family dwellings. So that's the primary zoning was for residential detached single family dwellings. That's our R1, R2, R3, AR, and our RP, which is residential professional. Similar situation applies to the other middle housing, the triplexes and quads, townhouses, and cottage clusters. So again, they would be allowed by right in our R1, R2, R3, AR, and RP zones. DLCD.
I'm sorry, if I could hold on for just a second. Looks like Bryce has a question. I'm sorry.
Sure.
Doug, what up? If I understood the written public comment correctly, there was concern, and it sounded, at least to me, as though it pertained to the middle housing. So if you go back to the previous slide, I would love to hear, how you might respond to that particular concern, And maybe as well, like specifically how it might increase access to families rather than destroy nuclear families. If that's true in your opinion.
Yeah, so Counselor, I would start with the fact is it's a state law and we have to comply. So we had some of the similar comments come up when we were doing the duplex provisions that were brought forward to council, is that elements or areas within the community felt that having the potential to have a duplex in their neighborhood would diminish, one, their property values, and two, change the character of their neighborhood. At that time, we actually verbally had indicated, well, having a variety of housing types actually increases the vibrancy of neighborhoods. There was a lot of work that was done by the Housing Newberg group when we had a lot of conversations that were leading up to that. So the comment that you received this evening is I believe, was directed towards the triplex, quadplex townhomes and cottage clusters. And I think what's important to note is that by changing our land use regulations to comply with the state law, is we're providing the opportunity for the development community to build that type of housing product. It doesn't necessarily mean they will. We did some work in the HNA when we did the last update that came to you in July. And what we were looking at for this middle housing over a 20-year period was somewhere around 57 to 58 units out of the 3,300 units that were projected would be built over the course of the next 20 years. So it's a very small percentage. But it also provides the ability to have price points that families can afford. Today, we're selling, houses are being sold, new homes, in that $350,000 to $700,000 range. And so trying to find housing product that are low, very low, moderate income families can afford is important I believe, for this community overall. And we're part of the Portland metropolitan statistical area. And so our numbers get skewed. I think we've had this discussion recently where, if you look at some data sets, we may be, our family income is maybe, 15 to 25% actually less than it is than the whole PMSA as a whole. But we have housing challenges. We have people that are moving out of the Portland metro area and moving out to Newburgh for quality of life issues. Maybe can get a little bit more of a home. And so there's that pressure that's there. We're seeing rents are going up. Purchase price of homes are continuing to go up. Labor costs are going up. Land values are going up. And so we're trying to find ways of how we can produce housing product that will align with the incomes of the families that do live in Newburgh. There is a piece of this, though. You could have a situation, the way that the regulations are being proposed is you could have a single family home in an existing neighborhood, and it could be converted into a duplex or a triplex. There's actually provisions in the administrative rule to allow that to occur. And so again, through the work, through the committee that was established, that met and worked on this project, we looked at that conversion as an opportunity. That conversions may play more so maybe into the older neighborhoods immediately north and south of downtown, where we have some of the larger homes, or you might be able to create a triplex, have one unit basically in the basement, one on the main level, and one upstairs. Does that answer your question, Counselor?
Yes, yeah. If I took a couple notes here, things that stood out. So it sounds like part of it is state law, right? That we're needing to be in compliance with, increasing vibrancy, and then opening up ability or accessibility for folks who may not be able to afford single family homes priced at $350,000 to potentially $700,000.
Correct.
Thank you.
So Sue, let's go to the next slide. So as I indicated, these are the zones where this other middle housing would occur. So anything that's in the yellow or the brown colors are our residential. Then we have a little bit of the residential professional out over east, to the east of Springbrook, out in that master plan area. And as I indicated, our estimates, now the state has indicated that, 3% of your future housing would be in this middle housing category. And as I stated earlier, that for us, that equates to about 57 to 58 units. Could be more, it could be less. Again, it's market driven. What will the developers do? What we're doing is providing that opportunity and the flexibility for these other housing product types to be constructed. Next slide. So some of the code updates. So we had to go back and update all of our definitions to be in alignment with the administrative rule. We had to proposing to allow, again, in all of these residential zones. I should say we're also have put into this proposal the institutional zone for cottage clusters, because that question has come up repeatedly over the last couple of years. We had to address lot sizes. And so these different products, we start with our base of our residential, but when we get to a fourplex, it has a little bit larger lot size than you would from a detached single family home in R1. There are some design standards, primarily for the cottage clusters and the townhomes. There are design elements by administrative rule that we can require. We cannot do more than what the administrative rule says, but we can go up to and be equal with what the administrative rule, and we've taken that latter approach. There are so some design elements on triplexes and quadplexes, and I'll get some graphics of how that might look. Parking is always a big issue. There was a lot of conversation about parking over the course of the last year. And in the regulations, it's one space per unit. So if you have a triplex, it's one parking space for each unit. If you have a quadplex, it's one parking space per each unit. Townhome, it's one space. For a cottage cluster, it's one parking space. And I'll show you some graphics of how parking might work in a cottage cluster in a little bit. Next slide. One more, keep going, Sue. One more. There we go. Unit definitions. So again, in providing the flexibility, the ad hoc committee works with our consultants and staff and provide that greatest flexibility that's possible. So on your left-hand of the slide, your graphic, that's a triplex. So you've got 3 units on one lot. On the left is you've got a fourplex, but those units are detached. So you could take the one on the left and say you could put 3 units that are detached on one lot, or you could attach them, or you could have 2 of them attached and 1 detached. Same kind of scenario for the fourplex. And so that provides the development community the most flexibility to try to be able to construct that type of product on the ground. Next slide. Permitted uses. So this is a table, and we're updating tables within our code. So you can see the 2 top rows, the detached single family and the duplex dwellings. They're allowed in all of those zones I've mentioned several times. Townhouses in our code currently are a special use standard, and that's being changed so they would be permitted outright. Triplex, quadplex, and cottage clusters would be allowed in all of the zones. Next slide. On this one is the lot sizes that I've referred to. So the top row is what we have for our single family detached in our code today. For triplexes, the minimum lot size in our R1, 2, and RP and AR zone would be 5,000 square feet, but it's 4,500 in our R3. Quadplex is 7,000, except for in R3, it's 6. Minimum lot size for townhouse is established by administrative rule, 1,500 square feet, and the minimum lot width is 20 feet. And for a cottage cluster, the minimum lot size would be 7,000 square feet, and the minimum number of units you could have in a cottage cluster would be 4. Our code is really driven on density. And so one of the things we also had to look at is, though we're going to capture for our annual reporting purposes, the number of units that are created for density purposes. Same thing for duplex, but for triplex, quads, townhouses, and cottage clusters, the tris, quads will be counted as 1 unit for density purposes. And so that's going to increase our density up a little bit. And so that kind of gets to a comment, I think, that was provided earlier in your general comment section. Next slide. Townhouses. So in R1, you could have up to 4 attached townhouse units, and then you'd have to have a break, and then you could have another 4. In our R2, R3, RP, and AR zones, you could have up to 8 attached units in a row before there have to be a break. In our cottage cluster, I should say a density calculation would be 4 units per acre. And right now we're still trying to fine tune before I finish the report up tomorrow is 3 or 4 units would be the minimum. The maximum number of units in a cluster in R1 would be 8. In the R2, R3, RP, and AR, the maximum number of units in a cluster could be 12. You could have 2 clusters, though, on 1 parcel. You could also have a cluster and an existing detached single-family home. Or you could have 2 clusters and the existing detached single-family home. So again, those flexible components. Cottages, the maximum footprint of a building can be 900 square feet. And again, established by administrative rule. The total maximum floor area for a cottage would be 1,800. So that's 900 square feet each floor, assuming a 2-story building. Next slide. All of our standards have to be clear and objective. And so that's why we're having to revise our standards that are currently in our code for townhouses, because they are not. And we're introducing these new clear and objective standards for triplexes and quadplexes. And then something new, completely new that we don't have in our code, of course, is the cottage clusters. This is kind of a list of some of the design features to be considered. Again, following the administrative rule requirements, but entryways, windows, garage locations, and driveways. It's important on cottage clusters is there has to be this courtyard. And so these units are actually wrapped around a common courtyard. And there's, for each unit, there's X number of square feet that would be required. Next slide. So these are just some examples of, how a unit might be constructed. So on your right-hand side, you could have an example of a duplex, or it could have been a triplex, where you have kind of a common entryway, and then you tee off of that and go into the units. You could have other situations where you have displaced, and so you're trying to create that front entryway going into the unit itself. It could be off to the side, it could be straight off of the sidewalk. Again, the approach we were taking is to be as flexible as possible. Next slide. There are some requirements related to the facades and some maximums. And so here, if we're looking at some townhouse, there's some window and covering maximums. And when we get to December 6th, our consultant will go into more detail on that. But there's some caps of things that we can do by the administrative rule. Next slide. So, here's an idea of, again, it's just an idea, representation of something. It might be a fourplex where you've got a bump out at G going into the entrance. You might have another unit that's got more of an awning or a canopy and a bay window. If you move to the next unit, it could be recessed, but you might have a balcony up on the second floor. And then on the far left of this, where it's labeled D and A, you could have more of a kind of a plain entrance, but you might have a dormer. So there's mixing and matching that could occur on those physical features as you see them from the roadway. Next slide. Cottage clusters. So I mentioned the issue about units having to be wrapped around a common courtyard. So in this graphic representation is you've got 6 units, 2, 4, 6, almost 7 units that are kind of wrapped around that common courtyard. But the units are a little bit different. Down in unit D is that you might have a carport off the back, or you could have a garage off the back. Some of the other units would have a field of parking that they would utilize. But then you'd have these walkways that would take you into that common courtyard area. Again, this is just one idea of how a project might be laid out. There are others. Next slide. Parking. I mentioned 1 space per unit. We had to address the issue about driveways. And with just having one, then there's, I think some would say, we've received comments before on the duplex stuff, is there's more pressure to park on the street. So we had to adjust some of our driveway widths and spacings in order to be able to create that parking space on the street. Now, a developer could choose to not have a garage, but they could provide 1 off-street parking space, and that's allowed. They could put in a garage and have 2 off-street parking spaces. But there's always the question, well, where does the guest park? The guest parking in the street. And so we had to think through how we would adjust certain standards in our code to respond to the parking questions that had come up. The townhouses, the driveways on these are 12 feet wide on a 20-foot wide lot. So you can think about what you primarily might see is more of a dominance of a garage, a driveway and a garage, and not a lot of living space. But again, that's driven by, this lot width requirement and lot size requirement. Next slide. So this is one that's trying to give you some ideas of how a townhome or townhouse development might occur. So you've got 4 units on each one, but the developer may choose to separate driveways. They could combine driveways. So again, it's from a developer's perspective, what would be marketable and sellable. And so we've put this package together such that it gives them that flexibility to respond and make adjustments upon how that might look from the street. Next slide. Here's another representation of a cottage cluster development. And so again, you see the common area in the middle with units wrapped around it. You can see some on the left-hand side are labeled, they've got garages. Other units are using the field of parking, which is up in the north corner. Walkways, to connect between the units to get to that parking field that's out there. And even down on the bottom right of this one, you've kind of got a cottage, and then it's attached to another cottage. So something that kind of looks like a duplex is possible to do as well. Next slide. So then we also had to go back and we had to make adjustments to our specific plans. So our Northwest, Springbrook Oaks, Springbrook Properties, the Riverfront Master Plan is already integrated in, and we're proposing to make some changes to the text in there to respond to the House bill. But we had to go back in and look at all of those and make certain adjustments. And we'll get into more detail on that when we get to our public hearing on December 6th. But with that, I will stop and see if there are more questions.
All right, folks, there you go. There's your call for questions. All right, I am not seeing any. Oh, there's Mike.
Okay, so Doug, can you explain what is the administrative rule? Is that what the state that passed? I don't know what the word is for it, that tells us what we have to do or whatever in the housing?
Yes. So the legislature passed House Bill 2001. That then got codified into Oregon revised statutes in Chapter 197. And then there are administrative rules that clarify what's in the statute. And so there was a long process through the Department of Land Conservation and Development working with stakeholders around the state to put together these administrative rules. And the first one they did was the duplexes, which we already addressed. The second one was this other middle housing, which they finally got adopted in December of 2020. So, point of clarification is that I brought this up back towards the beginning of the presentation, is that the council, sitting at the time, said, yes, let's work on the other middle housing as well. There are thresholds. If you are a community of over 10,000 but less than 25,000, you had to comply with the duplex provisions by June 30th of 2021, and we did that. If you are a community over 25,000, we are considered then to be a large city. We were a medium city when we started this process. So when we started, we did not have to comply with the quad clusters and townhomes, but the council at the time said, yes, we want to. We have now passed the 25,000 population threshold. So we are now at 25,138. PSU has to certify that. So we have a 2-year window from when PSU says, oh, you're over 25,000, and that number may come out the end of this month if they align with the census number. And then we would have 2 years in order to comply. But because we got the grant to hire the consultant to help us do all of this work, we had the package already sitting there. And so back in June, when we were having the work session, we said that we would be back in the fall to bring forward that package. So when I say we have to comply, we're going to have to comply because we're now over that 25,000 population. It's a matter of when. Do we do it now or do you delay it? If we delay it, then DLCD may say, well, we gave you the grant money to put all this stuff together. Why aren't you adopting it?
Okay, so what if a builder comes in and he has 5 acres of property that he wants to build houses on? If he wants to build single family homes, is he allowed to do that? Or because it's only 3% of all that we're going to be building. Is that what I saw in the presentation?
Yeah, the 20%. So 3% over the course of the next 20 years. So a developer, if there was a 5-acre parcel and that developer wanted to come in and build detached single family homes, he can still do that, or they can still do that. Staff would say, hey, we've got this provisions in our code, have you considered possibly putting in a duplex or some duplexes or a triplex to help us meet our targets of what we're going to have for a number of dwelling units in the future. Now we're going to have another thing because we got another grant to do a housing production strategy. And so as we work through that, and I don't have all the answers yet, is that we're going to have to start to look, how do we ensure that we are producing the number of units that we need to accommodate our population growth over the course of the next 20 years?
Right. So one last question, if I may. It seems like to me that if you're only going to have one parking space for a triplex, I mean, families, husband and wives are both working. And so if you have one person parking in the one spot, and then the other, I guess, would have to park out on the street. And it just seems like, I mean, couldn't we make it a little bit bigger lot size so that you could have a husband and wife have 2 cars? Because like I say, most spouses and their husband and wife are both working. That's just the way it is nowadays. So
Yeah, there was a lot of conversation when we were putting together the proposed regulations. And so we have a cap of what we can require. A developer can put in more if they want to. We just can't require them to say, oh, you have to put in 2. That would be counter to what the state provisions are. So, but the developer could come in and say, hey, I'm gonna build this triplex, but what I want to do is I want to make sure it has 2-car garages. And they can do that. And that's okay.
All right, Denise.
How different is this than what's behind Fred Meyer and then what like Friendsview built over back by the hospital? I mean, it's a little bit bigger, but it's basically the same, right?
Yeah, so what you have behind Fred Meyer are townhomes. And so under the new rules is that the lots could be a little narrower, a little smaller than what they were when that product was constructed, what now, probably about 10 years ago or so. From what Friendsview is doing behind Providence, that's a duplex development, all on one big lot.
So kind of similar, but not.
Kind of similar, but not the same.
Yes.
Yeah. I think another important distinction is the way our rules are written today is that we call anything that's a triplex and above multifamily. That is going to change by the definitions. Multifamily will now be 5 units and above. So think of it, we've got detached single family, then we'll have duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, we'll have townhomes and these cottage clusters. So it's more of a stair step. And so maybe what I need to do is when we come back for our hearing, there's a graphic that shows you the middle housing that goes from more of the true multifamily to the detached single family. And what this House bill did was look at the housing that's in between those in these categories that I've mentioned.
All right, Stephanie.
Yeah, this is sort of a piggyback on Denise's question, and forgive me because I don't know if I'm going to articulate this right, but we also have requirements around how much park space we have, right? And so not necessarily for development, but say a builder wants to come in and build, several lots of all these duplexes, triplexes. At some point, we as the city are going to have to say, okay, we need to figure out what our ratio is around housing units and park or green space. Is that correct?
So in part, so yes, we have language in our comprehensive plan about the number of acres of parks that are necessary based upon 1,000 population. But the city does not build parks. That is the responsibility, or CPRD has taken that on. When we did our analysis on our public, semi-public land, the numbers showed that we are deficient based upon our population growth, which translates the number of units over the course of the next 20 years. So yes, there will need to be conversations with the park district in the future about adding more parkland and developing that parkland with our growing population.
Thank you.
All right, other questions, folks? Okay. Just one thing I do want to mention, there have been a number of comments that not maybe everyone was able to see on the chat, and I believe they were from Carrie Flo, who provided the written comment earlier. Both Councillor Yarnell Holloman and I have both reached out and asked Carrie if she would like to talk further on the subject. Either or both of us would be happy to do so. It is, I will just say that the question of housing and housing affordability is probably one of the most vexing in this country. It isn't isolated to Newburgh. It's not isolated to Oregon. It's pretty much nationwide. And yes, Carrie, if you did not see that in the chat, if you would like to chat, please send me an email, rick.rogers@newburghoregon.gov, And I would happily set up a time, and I'm sure Elise would be as well. So thank you, and thank you very much for your interest. All right, anything else, Mr. Rux, on this subject?
That's it. We'll be back in front of you in December.
Okay, thanks so much. Let's move on to item 7B. This is an update on a council goal: promote development of housing affordability, such as houselessness, transitional housing, workforce housing.
Thank you, Mayor. So Doug Rux again. So this one's going to be a brief PowerPoint presentation. So next slide, Sue. All right, I know it's a little tough to read, but it's in your packet as well. But this is the graphic representation of the words that are in your staff report this evening. And so I reorganized this a little bit. So the top is kind of the long ongoing issues, the top 4 or 5. So we've got our annual trust fund, notice of funding availability. I sit on the board of the Yamhill County Affordable Housing Corporation. We've got the annual reporting we have to do for House Bill 4006 because we are a rent burden community. About 28.5% of our households are paying more than 30% of their income towards their housing costs. And then we've got the ongoing work with the Workforce Housing Consortium. Then we move down through this list of things that you see that's been completed. So we have been working on this for a while now. Actually, I think it goes back to 2008. So since I got here, we've been talking about housing in the last almost 7 years. So we've done a lot of different things. We did the R3 and the annexation in the UGB. We've done the accessory dwelling units, which again, state law required us to deal with that. We had the grant, $400,000 grant for our CDBG to do repairs on manufactured homes in manufactured home parks. We did the housing needs analysis. We actually did that 3 times. We did the initial version and then we updated it a couple of times. We did fee in lieu of for housing in the downtown area, adding another tool to the toolkit. We then had to go back and adjust our regulations for parking related to accessory dwelling units. So ADUs do not require any off-street parking. Then we did some work in the downtown area, following up on our downtown improvement plan. And that was for in the C3 zone. And that dealt with square footage and frontage of commercial that had to occur because we were losing potential opportunities for some redevelopment in the downtown area. When we first proposed this work program, the council accepted it back in a year ago, 364 days ago. We finished up the construction excise tax program, so that's on the books. We adjusted the timing of payment for your SDCs for single family and duplex dwellings, and we moved that to the time of insulation inspection. So that's more than 50% of the way into construction of a unit. We created the vertical housing development zone in the downtown area. We did that infrastructure-based time extension evaluation as part of middle housing, and that was for the areas north and south of downtown. You may remember we had one water line project up north between downtown and the railroad tracks, and we have about $6.5 million worth of water infrastructure improvements to do south of downtown. A lot of that's all related to fire flow. I mentioned we updated our housing needs analysis twice. The last update included the 3% provision for middle housing. We did the duplex provisions of House Bill 2001. We're in the process, your previous presentation on the other middle housing. We are working on the urban renewal program. So that will be coming back to you in the first half of 2022. And then we did that full analysis looking at our housing needs, our economic opportunities analysis, and our public, semi-public land analysis. So some of the things we've got going on this particular fiscal year, we'll be, again, working on the urban renewal stuff. We've finished up the housing needs analysis. We'll be finishing up by the end of the calendar year, the other middle housing components. Next slide. So what I've added on this particular page is we've added the implementation of the construction excise tax. So one of the work items that Mary has is putting together how the program will be implemented. And so she's gathering information from other communities who have a construction excise tax, and we'll be working with the Affordable Housing Commission to put together all of the paperwork for that. And then once we got a product that we believe is fairly well refined, we'll get back in front of City Council, and Council will have an opportunity to look at that material as well. The Fair Housing Council of Oregon had been talking to me about having clear and objective standards for needed housing. It's another state law provision, and we do have some subjective elements in our code. So we started down that path, but then we applied for a grant to do the housing production strategy, but we've also applied for another grant to do a code audit to update all of the other provisions outside of the middle housing to make sure that those are clear and objective. And we're waiting to hear if we're going to receive that grant or not. We have in the work program this year to work on small and tiny homes, recreational vehicles, car camping, sharing of utility lines, look at our restrictions we have in our code to have internal interior accessory dwelling units that are connected by doorways and so forth. Our code says you can only have one kitchen in a home. So that'd be another one that Mary will be looking at. I mentioned the housing production strategy got moved up. We were going to be doing that in 23, 24. So that's moving forward in time because we did get the grant. We got another $500,000 grant for CDBG for manufactured homes. So working on the grant contract paperwork. So James, thank you for getting comments back. This one on decrease in time from substantial completion to final plat. There was another state law that was passed. So we have put together, we now have an agreement document that we're operating under a policy, but we do need to go through and make updates to our development code to incorporate that into our land division and PUD regulations. Housing implementation plan strategy, that's something that's in the future. Minimum lot sizes is another future work item. Density standards, and one of those is we have stream corridors, but our regulations don't work very well for transferring the density out of those stream corridors to the developable portion of a property. Property tax abatement. Yes.
Sorry, Doug, just one quick question. Can you define car camping for us?
Car camping. Car camping would be individuals or families who do not have a permanent residence over their head, a permanent roof, but they are living in their vehicles. And of course, we have regulations that you can't park more than 72 hours on a public street, and you have to move your vehicle. Other communities have looked at, can you create a location where people can be able to safely reside in their car while they're trying to find permanent housing that's safe for them and others. And so we'll have to dig into that one more. It's something that the Affordable Housing Commission brought up. It's something that the city of McMinnville had been looking into as well. That help, Mayor?
Yeah, it did. Thank you, Doug.
We have another item that's on our list is housing on faith-based religious institution property. So there is another bill that was passed that allows that, but we don't have the regulations in place to be able to do that. But there have been conversations with a variety of our faith-based organizations about the potential of having housing on their campuses. And then we move out further in time. And I won't get into all of that, but this program still, we set it up. It's a 5-year program. Wanted to give you kind of a 1 year, here's where we're at 364 days later after you accepted it. There's a lot to do. Then there's a whole category, kind of, Sue, if you could go to the next slide. You know, we're going to have to revisit the construction excise tax. That was a 6-year. In year 5, we got to evaluate, you know, how that program has worked. But we've got other things to looking at for subsidized housing, expedited review, street standards, increasing structure height. We talked about that as part of the middle housing. And from that dialogue was keeping it the same in our R1, but there is a little bit more height. There have been some conversation in the past, should we have another zone that goes up even higher than what's currently on our book? So, you know, we have an R4, which is for manufactured parks, but we can have an R4 something that you could have multifamily that truly might get 4 floors instead of just 3. Continuing system development charge. I know council is talking about that now in part. Manufactured home parks, street lighting. Another one that came up was for our efficiency dwelling units, which are small units, is maybe increasing the size of that because you get a reduction in your SDCs. So those two kind of come together. And then there was one that came up from the Home Builders Association about vesting SDC charges at the time of land use application. When we ran that through as part of the construction excise tax, it was not desired to do that at that point in time, but we've added it to the list of something to look at in the future. So that's kind of where we're at with your council goal.
All righty. Thank you, Doug. Any additional questions, folks? All right. Not seeing any at the moment. Again, thank you. We'll look forward to the next update. All right. Moving on in the agenda, item 8A is council committee reports. Any reports, folks? All right, seeing none. I know we added one item here, and I don't know, Doug, if you've got an update on this, but I know Mike asked about Leonard Johnson's status on his request for a storage building.
We are working on it. We have an application. It's in. It was deemed incomplete. We have a situation as we started to peel back the onion on this one, is there's a public easement over the property where the existing building is at, and our public easement goes right through the middle of the building. And so we're working, I have to bring a proposal back to the council for your consideration to release that easement. Having ongoing conversations with the family and their representatives about the size of the structure and how our development regulations work in the downtown area. Because basically in C3, the buildings are supposed to be pulled out to the street, set back no more than 10 feet. So we're working with issues about non-conforming building coming down. Could we shift it a little bit to get away from some utility infrastructure, primarily a PGE pole, keeping it the same size? The application we got has a building that was bigger footprint than the one that's there. So I'm trying to work through that particular issue. Then we have tied in with all of this is the NAPS. And so if you ever look at a map, it shows that there's an alley going through NAPS. And Sue has been doing research. We're trying to find the documentation and if that alley was properly vacated or not. And then there was Grant Street. Was it properly vacated or not? So that research is still ongoing. So Counselor, we're working on it. It's taking some time, given the fact there's just Mary and myself at this point.
All right. Thank you for that, Doug. All right. Go ahead, Mike.
So why can't we just, I know that the size is going to be a little bit bigger, but it's still less than 1,000 square feet. Why can't we just issue him a building permit, get the thing built, because he wanted to do it before winter, deal with all these other dotting the I's and crossing the T's and letting get started. And then, you know, we grant permission to use it once it's built. By that time, we should be able to have all this extracurricular activity taken care of. I mean, my gosh, this has just gone on way too long. And I understand some of the things that you guys have found, you know, but it's basically going to be just in the same spot, only just a tiny bit bigger. Why not can't we just do that?
Well, Counselor, I follow the laws that are on the books that are adopted by the city council.
You know, Mike, I too have chatted with Leonard and other members of the family over the last number of months. And, you know, I think, again, it's a challenging thing. We need to, yes, I agree. I think we need to work toward it. And, you know, again, if your opinion, I mean, there's always I would imagine a variance possibility as well. But Doug would certainly understand and knows how that works. But, you know, unfortunately, as Doug says, there are rules, there are code that, you know, that is tough, you know, so. But I'm encouraged to hear that you're still working through it. So that's good. And hopefully there will be a resolution. Anything else on that subject? Okay. You know, I have another one for maybe for a future time, actually, is, you know, I would love to hear an update on how we're doing on taking the mill down and how we're doing on, you know, what the next steps will be for development of the mill site. Just, I get a lot of questions. And so,
well, if you like, Mayor, I can give you a quick update.
Sure, that'd be great. Unless, yeah, if that's all right with everybody, that'd be great.
So the mill site is under demolition. They're targeting to have demolition completed by the end of the year. So a lot of activity, a lot of things have come down out there. Have been in discussions with the property owner about redevelopment opportunities. Looking at, you know, potential lot layouts for that redevelopment. We've been coordinating with them on potential recruitment opportunities that are coming through my office, and I'm sharing those opportunities with CDC. So things are moving along. Again, you know, everybody would like things to move quicker, but it takes time to take down a big manufacturing facility like that.
I know they're working 7 days a week over there.
And
many hours.
They start early in the day too.
They start really early. Yes. I think of it as a game. That way it doesn't affect I don't let the noise bother me, but yeah, they're busy over there. It's definitely moving along.
And then Doug, how will the recruitment work for, you know, trying to lure these traded sector companies? What's happening in that area?
Well, we get recruitment leads from a variety of ways. Some come through the state of Oregon, some might come through SEDCOR, others come from the brokerage community. So when those opportunities come up, we share those with CDC, and then CDC is doing their own recruitment and trying to find potential buyers for parcels for redevelopment. So it's a think of it as kind of a spider web. There's lots of things sort of going on. As I try to say, you know, as we're coming out of the pandemic, there's actually a lot of development activity that's occurring in the industrial side. And I think part of your NERPS presentation that you were given earlier, there's a lot of activity on the industrial side. It's trying to hit in that ebb and flow and that biorhythm, and having a site that it's hard if you show somebody and say, oh, you know, redevelop the site and there's this great big paper factory there. It looks very different when all of it's down and you can get it down to asphalt and gravel and concrete pads. It looks very different from an investor developer's perspective.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks very much for that update. I know there are a number of people out there in the public, so we'll get that shared out at the end of the calendar year. Holy cow.
That's their target.
That is
Mayor,
incredible.
I'd like to
All right.
just add one thing about the ongoing recruitments that we're looking at. My plan is to bring you one clean resolution that will list multiple appointments that are already approved so as to expedite that process and try to get Doug the people he needs as fast as possible.
Great. Thank you very much. Will, just out of curiosity, do you know offhand, no, this is probably an unfair question. I'll not even ask it. Forget it. Forget it. I'll not.
If it's about hiring, I know the answer probably.
Oh, do you? How many open recruitments do you have right now? Do you know?
Right now, 7 that are approved.
7 approved. Okay. Well, you see, you did know the answer.
Mostly the replacements for things that we've already got going.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Bryce.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you both to Doug and Mary. I know you all are working incredibly hard and probably have an overload at this point with all the things you have going on. I know it's a lot and it's hard and you probably do not get thanked enough. So definitely thank you. Deeply appreciative of both the work you're doing and who you are and how you show up to the work.
And I know we had a comment in the chat, Mary, but welcome, right, to the city of Newburgh. It's exciting to have a housing planner. That's an exciting thing. And so thank you, thank you for joining the team and thank you for your help for the city, for the community, and for Doug. So there you go. So thank you. Thanks so much. All right.
Yeah. Thank you all.
All righty. Anything else for the good of the order, folks? All right. Seeing nothing. We'll be back here in another couple of weeks. And I'm sure we'll talk in between. Otherwise, everybody take care and have a nice evening. All right. Bye-bye.